said, nothing without us because everything is about us. And I think nothing is truer than that than in the world of technology.
So thanks very much, Christine. Can everyone hear me? Just had the mic changed. Okay. Yep, we're good now. So what wonderful words to end on. Nothing about us without us.
Nothing without us because everything is about us.
Right on. Got it. Perfect. So we do have a good amount of time for questions, and we do have microphones roving. And just as we're getting things going, I might use the chair's prerogative to pick a question. And my question relates to something that one of you brought up about potential data privacy issues. I'm kind of looking over at the robots. They're potentially talking to my children, my elderly father. Might they ask a question to which they receive an answer that could be, I don't want to say incriminating, but maybe is not, an answer that we would like to hear. Does anyone on the panel want to kind of tackle this potential concern related to data privacy with these types of technologies, and what might happen if those get into other hands or used for other purposes?
Well, as I said, I think it's a challenge that is currently overlooked or naively understood, especially in the technology industry. There is the impression that if we don't have video recordings of things, then it's safe and we don't have to worry about a privacy breach. There are several threats. One is the fact that persons with disabilities in general, but specifically persons with cognitive disabilities, tend to be more naive, tend to have to rely on others for caregiving, and so they are at increased risk of privacy breaches and other threats. So one of the questions for which I don't have an answer is whether or not we need policy frameworks and legislation that would take into account those specific threats. And I hear both sides, and so I don't have an opinion. Some argue that because of the additional threats, we should have additional frameworks, and others say, well, no, it's the same conditions as for anybody else. So I'm looking for legal and policy opinions on that matter, but it's one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves. And to me, the question you raise is we have to anticipate the type of data that can be recorded by the technology. And not everything can be anticipated. And the danger is who has access to the data. And again, I don't see any informed, intelligent conversations on the topic. And there is a tendency to think that because you are in a caregiving role, you're allowed to have access to this information, which to me is questionable. It was not about technology, but when I was a clinical psychologist, I had to intervene in a family because the young adult was having some challenging behaviors according to his parents. And when I started to ask questions about the specific situation, I realized that what was happening is that the 20-so-year-old wanted to have his personal life, didn't want mom and dad to know everything, so he would disappear for part of the day intentionally. And mom and dad, they were scared about his safety, so they wanted to have more protection around him, and they wanted to know everything about what he was doing. Well, it's easy to think of a GPS tracking system to know where he is at any time, but it's not an information you wanted to disclose. So a lot of very complex questions that I think we are naively studying or thinking about.
Michael, I heard the word policy mentioned,
Oh,
or,
no,
sorry.
Yeah, I wish I had an answer, but I think I would, is that working? The thing it tweaked in me is some of the concerns around ethics need to be understood in the context of how we see the agency of people with disabilities. So the idea that a disabled person should have a sex life is, a lot of people disagree with that. And there's a lively debate about the fact, and there are lots of legal cases that have been, we've been hearing about. But at the same time, I think the starting point is to ask, before we can even think about policies, is to ask about what kinds of safeguards can be put in place to ensure that there is a zone of privacy around someone who has the cognitive ability to engage in whatever it is, I'm just using sexual relationship, but there have been some cases around that would say that as a person with disability, your life is not kind of up for grabs, and that you are able to enjoy the protection of the law in some regard. But I don't think we're there in terms of a discussion because of kind of the understanding of what citizenship means for folks who are disabled. But I don't have
No, I think that's all I would say.
Great. I'm looking around the audience just in case there are, do we have a question from? Perfect. No? Oh, we do. Raphael, just to your left there.
Where?
This is a question for Dr. Lewis. And the question is, how does one discover new technologies or prototypes that are being developed? Where are they being developed from? Are they coming from industry? Are they coming from inventors? Are they coming from universities? What's the next best thing coming out? Like, how do we make those discoveries of what's being developed?
That's a good question. I think the answer is that the new technologies and new ideas are actually coming from all over, from the universities, from the labs. For example, some members of the ISSP are interested in brain-computer interfaces. No telling what kind of ethical questions and unanticipated consequences that might bring down the pike. So it's actually coming from all over. I know that the main technologies I know about now are virtual reality, augmented reality, brain-computer interface, social robots. Am I missing anything else? Those are the big things now. Autonomous cars, of course, which are going to bring in lots of ethical concerns.
Yes, the question is for Dr. Lewis. Again, I would like to take advantage of the fact that we have someone from the United States, if you could share, and perhaps we can learn upon your very strong federal legislation on the Disability Act that you have. In Canada, we have something similar, but I think we lag behind the United States in many aspects. One example, if I'm correct, is that Microsoft, for example, developed their software so that it could be as inclusive as possible because they were scared that they would be litigated. And so now they take it very seriously. In Canada, we're a bit behind on that, and we sort of say that we have these great legislation, but when you actually look at stats, we're in many ways behind in the United States, especially when it comes to the public service and in making sure that this people with disabilities are included. So I was wondering if you could share on how we can learn from your experience in the United States. Thank you.
Yeah, that's another good question. I think that's better for Michael, but for some reason, but let me give you my take on it, because it has to do with policy and legislation. And we do in the U.S., I'm just reminded of a lab assistant of mine in a digital music course that I like to teach because I'm a musician. And but she had a visual impairment, and she used all those technologies that you mentioned to get real close to her computer and read words and such. and it worked out. It worked out beautifully. She had a great mind for music, also. So it worked out great. But I don't know the extent to which legislation governed her role in the university. I'm just not aware of it. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I shouldn't be worried about that, but just worrying about, but just thinking about and appreciating and admiring the contribution that was made to the classroom. So that's my take on your question. Do you think that's a fair question for you, Michael?
Yeah, well, no, but I'll try. I would be very careful about vaunting the success of the ADA in the U.S., and I'm not going to be a booster for Canada in any regards, but there are important reasons why the U.S. is failing disabled kids, namely racialized kids all over the U.S. states. I mean, and folks who have done this work, it's not a coincidence that African American kids are diagnosed with all kinds of learning difficulties, warehoused in particular schools. So the ADA, I think there's been important legal kind of cases that have focused attention, and Canada doesn't have anything that resembles the ADA, but I think the broader public discourse in the U.S. is especially ableist, and in the current sort of context of Trump, I think there is no concern about the rights and citizen rights of people with disabilities. Any wins have been hard fought, but I'm not an expert on the U.S. context to speak. And I think it's fair to say that Canada has a long road to hoe. But I mean, there are important reasons why we understand in Canada charter rights, and we understand that disability status is an important axis of oppression for folks. But so I don't want to hold up Canada as a model of anything, but I think we should be really careful about vaunting the U.S. kind of response to disability policy. Lundy, I don't.
I see a lot of hands coming up now, so we'll start. Yes, please go ahead.
I would like to know if there's a service available to disabled people to assist them in assessing technologies that can help them. For example, in my own case, I need a throat mic or something like this to boost my voice, and also would benefit from a computer program like Stephen Hawking had to respond quickly to quick conversation. Is there similar technologies available in Canada?
The technology is available. Generally, what's available in the States, because we are so close, we kind of get that idea that we can easily access it. One of our challenges is, of course, funding, but there are a number of support organizations that support individuals with disabilities. Sometimes it's related specifically to the type of a disability a person's living with. Others are more general, and they do look specifically at assistive technologies. And I think it's really about connecting to some of those organizations to look at what your individual needs are as well.
Great, thank you. I think we had one in the first row here, Raphael. Yes, thank you.
My name is Vangelis. I just wanted to comment on the question that Michael tried to tackle. I think the comparison between legislation in Canada and the US is a difficult issue, but I think that where the Americans have had more successes than we had has to do with the fact that perhaps as a result of their larger numbers, they have had for a long period of time more massive, stronger organizations of persons with disabilities. The nothing about us without us has been really the key difference between Canada and the US. We've had made efforts in Canada, but let's face it, we haven't had the types of organizations that they had in the US for a long time.
Did you want me? Yeah, absolutely. But I think that also addresses the issue that it's been a bottom-up kind of a response as opposed to any kind of top-down government interest in promoting the rights of folks with disabilities. But yes, Vangelos rocks.
Raphael, I think I saw a hand up over on this side at one point in time.
Thanks, Raphael. This question would be for any of the panelists, and I want to come at it from the question of university curricula. And let's talk specifically about the career paths for technologists, the next generation of engineers, those that have a focus on, business opportunities around technology. I'm a bit out of date. My experience is that the career path is let's get an engineering degree, then let's get an MBA. Let's understand how to make technology, and let's understand how to make money. My question is, how are we doing with, growing the next generation that comes to understand what the social good is? What concepts such as, inclusive design are all about? And so how you can make money but actually help a larger sector in society actually see the benefits of that development. Are we doing okay, or is there work to be done here? Is there examples here at the University of Ottawa, perhaps in the U.S. that we could use as role models?
I can tackle this one. So, to my knowledge, and I'm not an engineer, it's still not part of the regular curriculum. However, there are some learning resources and training resources that are available that we see coming out of departments like human-computer interaction departments or those kind of disciplines. So there are some trainings that are started to emerge and be disseminated, but they are not part of the regular curriculum. I think targeting the next generation is smart. At the same time, their teachers are not the next generation. So we need to teach them as well how to teach the next generation. These are preliminary findings. I'm still doing the study, but I've looked into what is the current knowledge around privacy laws, Canadian privacy laws in technology developers who have experience, not the next generation, those who are currently developing technology, either in the private industry or in academics. And they know very little. They tend to think that, especially for the academics, because they only develop laboratory prototype and they don't have any intention of selling necessarily the technology. They don't feel it is necessary for them to consider those questions, which is troublesome because they're supposed to develop innovation. But what we learn, and these again are preliminary findings, what we learned is that to really reach out to technology developers, they don't want trainings. They want services of people who know how to do it and can tell them how to do it. So my impression is that instead of thinking only about training and education, we have to think about how can we provide those services so then we will be in the industry. And of course, these services have to involve persons with disabilities. So we can chat more because I'm actually writing a grant application to try to think of those ideas at the moment.
I would like to say this. For several years, I've consciously thought that, I'm impressed by the younger generation, and I'm talking about the 20-somethings. I'm teaching more undergraduate courses these days than graduate courses. And it seems as the society evolves that these kids are becoming more socially conscious and more of acceptance than fixing disabilities and just natural helping. I've been impressed on many occasions by just observing that among the younger generation. But I got to add an important qualification. That's at the university level, and not all kids go to the university. So I don't know. I'm afraid that they might not be as accepting and socially conscious as the ones that I see. But that just points to the fact that education is key. Try to get everybody as much education as possible.
Great, and maybe I can also weigh in on this. I wear another hat some days. I'm also an adjunct professor with the School of Epidemiology and Public Health at the University of Ottawa. And there I teach a graduate level course in health technology assessment. And so that course, over the years, we've seen more people from engineering coming and taking it as an elective, and they've remarked at how illuminating it is, because there they understand how the healthcare system works in terms of figuring out what it will cover for Canadian patients and citizens. So looking at not just does that gizmo technology do what you hope it does, but also looking at the economic aspects. So is this cost effective versus other technologies? Can we afford it? And then very importantly, looking at the ethical, legal, and social issues surrounding a decision to use or not use a technology. And so I would say the learning curve is steep for both of us, because engineers and those in the epidemiology school, have grown up in different ways and speak different languages. But just coming together over the course of one term has, I think, made those people who are going to be our future technology developers aware of what it takes to get something to market. So even if they do their MBA, they know we need to talk to some other people in order to be able to make that business case. So it underscores your point about education's the key. Socializing this, hopefully on an accelerated timeline, because we can't wait for a generation to see this change happen. Other questions from the crowd?
Yeah, I have one
Yes,
question.
thank
One thing, and back to the whole education piece, right? So I work in the public service. I've been in the assistive technology field for, God, almost 30 years now, right? So one of the things that would be really cool is that if we could see the day where accessibility becomes built into the curriculum of the engineering schools, the business schools, the computer science schools, because we hire a lot of people in the federal government, right? And because we have something called Bill C-81 that's making its rounds through Parliament, sooner or later, we're going to have to make sure that everything's going to be accessible, right? So we need to be able to hire people that have those skill sets, right? We don't want to hire people, or I don't want to hire somebody that, I'll say, well, accessibility, and they kind of look at me like I'm from the planet Mars or something, right? So we need to see more and more of that built into the curriculum of the post-secondary institutions moving forward.
Great. Still just looking around. Yes, we have one in the back corner. We'll just hang on a second.
So I was struck by the difference between sort of the discussions around the robots and the idea that technology and AI is sexy versus the unsexy nature of, and your comments, Michael, about the mundane nature of public policy. So I'm just wondering, it's public policy that is governing our use of the technology, and it's not keeping up. So I'm just wondering if you can talk about how we could use the language of technology to sort of, hack the public policy if we were taking some of that technology language into the public policy sphere. I know there's some discussion around that.
That's a great question, and I wish I had a great answer. I think there are parts of, I guess it's hard to make public policy sexy. So I struggle on a daily basis. But I guess the sense that for me, thinking about public policy is if we sort of pull it apart and think about the key kind of actors that coalesce around that, then you can begin to see that the debates are not about necessarily policy makers. They're not necessarily about, yes, there are important bills down the road, but they're about what happens at that ground level, which is just real folks engaging with ideas that are challenging. Disability rights activists, Evangelos is right. I mean, there have been limited successes, but none of those successes were possible. None of that originated from any kind of government agenda. So what's sexy about public policy is that you can actually you can imagine that you can penetrate the world of policymaking and expert knowledge that is very closed, highly technical, and isolating and frustrating, and actually come up for air with something that resembles a policy that reflects the idea of a common good, which seems very old-fashioned, but I'm happy for some old-fashioned ideas today. But sorry, it's a great question. I think it's challenging because I said mundane just because the mundane is what we kind of ignore, and I think the mundane affects people in myriad ways, and it doesn't rise to the level of interest for a lot of folks. So, but it's such a great question. Hacking public policy. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Great. I think we have one in the back.
Yeah, I have a question about that. I applaud the advancements made in technology for those with disabilities. I benefit from it. But my question is about how do we make society accepting of that technology? We heard the problem that Christine had going to university where she had the technology to record a lecture, but had a reticent professor willing to accept that technology and that recording. I have a hearing disability, among others, but if I'm at a meeting and if it was without the mics and in front of everyone, I would put this little device on the table. It has a little blinking light, very inoffensive, almost invisible, but it picks up the speakers and transmits to my hearing aids, and I can hear. But there is this reticence, even for this little innocuous piece of technology. If someone was to come to a class or a school or a meeting with a robot, and that was the way that person had to interact in that meeting was through a robot, are we there yet in accepting these technological developments to help people with disabilities? How do we overcome that in society? I have no idea. Does the panel?
I don't think that any of us want to answer that question.
Can I just say one thing? I think part of the answer is putting the device on this table. I think part of the answer is asking people if they need anything. We don't ask, right? So I think in some ways what disability rights activists have done really powerfully is assume the position as opposed to asking for permission, right? I don't know.
We try to make people with disabilities acceptable and recognized and inclusive in society, but I don't think we've gone the next step. We have service dogs legislated to be accepted. Do we have to do that for all technologies to be accepted? I've had stuff, scanned and checked over and all the rest going through airport security because they're not aware of this device that I have. So I go aside, down. It becomes second nature. The technology has to be as invisible, hopefully, as disability is.
Absolutely, and if I can just add a point to that, it's the idea that education piece is so important, understanding that technology doesn't have to be this thing for those people over there. It's getting rid of that us and them mentality, that if you're part of that group or those people, then you need the technology, but it's moving beyond that to recognize that it has value for all of us, and getting rid of that sense of the mystique of something, right? Like there was a time when I would walk into my crutches and be like, "Oh, you broke your leg." Like I have to say, thankfully in my life, I don't get that question as often as I used to, but I'd be like, "No, this is how I was born," and then it's a different conversation, right? But hopefully we're in some areas we're moving beyond that, but we need to continue to put that forward, and I think that Michael's point is a good one. It's better to apologize later than ask permission. Right, and start from there, and take that space. I think it's about people with disabilities taking that space and the agency that they deserve.
Great, thanks, Raphael. Front row.
This is not so much a question, more than a comment. I have profound hearing loss, and I wear a hearing aid, but I also have a hearing ear dog guide. And one of the things that I've come across is as soon as I'm in public and people see me with my dog, the very first question they ask me is, "Oh, you must be training her." And I tell them right away, "No, I'm not training her." And I stop there and I purposely wait to see what their reaction is, and they're confused. So that's when I go ahead and I tell them there are 6 types of service dogs. And not a lot of people know that. So for me, I'm constantly educating people every single day about my hearing ear dog guide. When I'm in the bus sometimes, they're very confused because they automatically think that I'm blind, but they're confused when they see me play around with my cell phone and I have a dog. So for me, I deal with this education every single day. And also when I go in a taxi, oftentimes I will be refused a taxi, oftentimes. And also just a few weeks ago, I was in Montreal with a friend of mine, and we went into a Thai restaurant. And as soon as I walked in, the waiter said, no, 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 no dog, no dog, no dog. And I showed them my piece of IT, and they said, no, no, no dog, no dog. I could have pushed the issue a little bit more, but the restaurant was so small, so tiny, that I didn't want to subject my dog to that kind of condition. So what I think a lot of people with disabilities and their families and their friends need to do is advocate. Self-advocacy is so, so important. And the message comes across much better, much stronger when you get it from a person with a disability. So that's my comment.
Can I add a comment to that? I think that's an excellent way of looking at it, and we tend to think that, oh, because we have legislation, that's the answer to all things. But the truth is, it's about education. And to go back to kind of that idea of consumerism, if I'm not going to go to a business that doesn't support me, and I'm going to tell my friends and my family that that business doesn't support me, because we need to understand that we have power as consumers as well. So the radical side of me is like, what's that restaurant? Let's go.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's important to have that conversation, and I respect your choice for deciding where that line is for you in that moment, because different moments, different times, it's a different experience. So I think that's important as well.
May I just add, I don't have a disability, or not a visible one, and I feel that we are often coward and not supportive of the advocacy that people with disability needs to do. So things like reporting when automatic doors are not working, because I don't need it, but someone behind me might need it. So if I see it's not working, I can report it. I don't. And those are very simple things that we can share as a responsibility. And I don't hear that message very often. And I think educating citizens without a disability about what difference it makes in the lives of persons with disabilities when we share that responsibility would be great. And the other thing I wanted to say is that we don't emphasize enough that persons with disabilities make huge contribution to the society, including in terms of technology development. We mentioned the ramps that, as a mother of a toddler, I enjoyed many, many times, the automatic doors, but also, I don't know about you, but I don't know how to calculate anything without a calculator. And that was not designed for people who don't have any specific needs for that type of technology. So I think in terms of the message, if we would use those examples a little bit more about, see, yes, it is benefiting persons with disabilities, but could you live without it now? I think it might help as well the conversation.
I'm just looking around the room to see if there are any other questions, and if not, I might pose one to Lundy, because these robots have me quite intrigued. And I guess maybe one of my questions for you would be, is there a worry with having robots working with young children or older patients with dementia, that we're actually creating something that's not authentic, and I think the literature calls it an inauthentic relationship? And is there a danger in that, or how can we kind of make sure that it doesn't get to that point where it is, the risks outweigh the benefits, if you will?
Yeah, that's a very hard question, and I've had this question before. And my response is this: it's sort of a cultural thing, the whole concept of being authenticity versus it being inauthentic. And so that's the first thing to get our arms around. I think in Japan, for example, inanimate objects are more accepted than in North America. And that's because I've had it explained to me several times that the sort of metaphysical underpinning of existence in Japan is that all objects consist of some degree of spirit. We don't even sort of understand what that means, but it's like the cup has some kind of spirit, not as much as a human or a deity. So therefore, it's easy for Japanese people to become, to have an authentic relationship with a robot. So, unlike North America. So that's the basic metaphysical thing to get over. But now if we put that aside and say, okay, well, let's just worry about North America, our metaphysics. And that brings in ethics. So I'll kick that over to Virginia. No, I'm just teasing. That's a hard ethical problem. I mean, and it depends on what ethical system you subscribe to. Utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. If the person with dementia can be measured to be happier with the robot, talking with the robot, as opposed to not having the robot, if you subscribe to utilitarianism, then yeah, it's okay. Maybe some other ethics principle framework, it would not be okay. It's just complicated.
Michael, did you want to weigh in? Come on, you know you want to.
No, I'm just interested in this whole idea that robots can, the idea of feelings, right? And I think because you've done work on autism too, like this idea that autistic folks lack empathy and kind of have an emotional deficit is also been challenged by lots of people who say that there are different ways of interacting, so that it's not sort of about a deficit in particular. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with that interaction with robots, but I think I would start from the question that there are assumptions about what are appropriate feelings and what are inappropriate feelings. And disability studies teaches me a lot about why we need to really hack that, kick at that idea. That's all.
Great. So this is the last chance, going once, going twice. Oh, we do have a question.
I'm jealous.
Yes, wonderful. A mic is on its way.
It's really a follow-up to the previous comment, but it's triggered by the description of the event in the restaurant. And I think a fundamental difference between what we have experienced in Canada and the US is that if you were an American, you would be more likely to sue. And even if you hadn't sued, and I understand your choice at that point, and I respect that, but I would guess that as a result of sharing this story, some organization may say, oh, let's go back and try the restaurant determination one more time. And I think that has been one of the key differences again. I think Michael, maybe you know about this. There are now ADA lawyers in the US who have organized themselves and they are doing drive-by suing. Oh yes, they drive by with clients, they identify a barrier, and then they sue. Yeah, no, it's been written up. It's true. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Just as a follow-up to my experience in the restaurant, when I got back home, I went to the Canadian Human Rights Commission and I put in a complaint. And I sent them a picture of the restaurant, the front store restaurant. But what I also did was I contacted the school where my hearing aid dog guide was trained, and I explained to them the situation. And I said, that's very interesting because we have around 12 clients who live in Montreal. So what they're going to do on their end is invite all those people with dogs to go to the restaurant. So I told them, once you guys do that, please invite me and let me know. So one of the things that people with disabilities often find themselves doing is they're the ones that live with the obstacles every day. So they're the ones that put in the complaints every day. And sometimes it can be tiring to always put in the complaint. So your comment earlier about having friends and family also putting in complaints, that's very nice. That's a nice thing to do, because sometimes I just want to go to the restaurant. If they don't want to let me in, okay, but I will put it in the complaint, and I will do what I need to do to educate them. So yeah, I did my due diligence, and I hope they're going to have 12 dogs in the restaurant.
Can I just add, as a Montrealer, Montreal is clearly one of the most inaccessible cities, and restaurants are notoriously bad in Montreal, inaccessible. And I distinctly remember with a colleague who uses a wheelchair, we were trying to look at a restaurant for dinner, and I called and I asked if they were accessible, and they said, yeah, except that there are 4 stairs to get up. And I was like, okay, thanks, that's really helpful. But I urge you, Laurence Parent, who's just finishing her PhD at Concordia, does some really, really good kind of accessibility audits of transit in Montreal. And she has sort of staged her own kind of guerrilla interventions. She's brilliant, she's smart, and she gets a lot of attention. She's on the sort of, I think she's on the board for the Montreal Transit Corporation. Laurence Parent is her name. But Montreal is bad. So anyway, sorry.
Well, on that note, and we're not talking about hockey, are we? No.
Sorry.
So I will ask you to please join me in thanking our panelists and all of you for being here this afternoon. A very thought-provoking and entertaining discussion.